Hello and welcome to the one-day classic Ghent Wevelgem, a race of 200 kilometres starting actually outside of Ghent these days in the small town of Deinze, making its way to Wevelgem. Tom Bonen, one of the big pre-race favourites, you can see the World Championship bands on his shoulders there, and of course Danny Pate riding at the front end of the main field for HTC High Road. They're obviously thinking today of their man Mark Cavendish. Former world champion Alessandro Ballan, one of the big favourites for Team BMC Racing, a team that hails from the United States of America. The riders make their way over the first 10 kilometres or so, a neutralised section before they actually get to the race proper. There is Philippe Gilbert having a quick chat with the world champion Thor Hushovd. A former winner of this race, and yes, very happy to be here. Of course, Bernard Eisel having a quick chat there with George Hincapie. Pre-race favourite, everybody says, is this man, Mark Cavendish, one of the fastest sprinters in the world. And of course, watch out for Sergei Ivanov on the inside here for Team Katusha, a man who knows how to get away from the pack when the race really starts in earnest. Still pretty much neutralised, but once the riders get out onto the open road, one thing that will buffet the riders is the wind, which is very prevalent in this part of Belgium. And as soon as the race starts, lots of attacks trying to get themselves clear off the front end of the main field. This is very much how Ghent Wevelgem always starts. So now in this very difficult part of the Ghent Wevelgem race, this is really where the action is. And all of the sprinters, they realise we talk about Ghent Wevelgem as being a sprinter's course. And what's this going on at the back? This looks to me like the shape of Tom Bonen. Now, Bonen probably has had some kind of a mechanical problem. He's using the cars to get himself back into the main field at this point. But as you can see, the main field stretched out into a very long line. It's going to be tough for Bonen to get himself back into this race. Over on the left-hand side, the dark green jerseys, that's the Europe car team. They've got a man in the breakaway. A little bit of a check from the mechanic there, and Bonen, wearing number 31, is trying to get himself back into this race all over his machine. He started the year off, again, very well in the Tour of Qatar, where he rode very prominently. Not quite as dominant as he has been over the last couple of seasons, but as you can see, Team Quickstep right up alongside him, trying to make sure that their big man, as they call him here, Tommeke, gets himself back into the breakaway. Thomas Voeckler, the French national champion, red, white and blue, riding as aggressively as ever. And just getting onto the back there, the French rider from Team Cofidis has made himself the junction. In fact, these riders are the survivors of the early morning breakaway. That's Romain Zingel is the rider in there for Cofidis, and Steven van Voren of Topsport Vlaanderen Mercator. And it looks very much to me as if Albert Timmer, the rider from Skill Shimano, is slipping off the back of the break. They did have a maximum advantage at one stage of around about 5 minutes, and that was after 70 kilometres of racing. As now we start to get into the Heuvelland, this is called in this area around here. Thomas Voeckler realises this is the chance for him to try and consolidate on that advantage. Interesting story about Thomas Voeckler. In fact, he had signed a pre-contract with Team Cofidis during the winter transfer season when it looked as if his previous team was going to fold, and Europe Car came in to stopgap the breach, and they said, we will sponsor the team as long as Thomas Voeckler is part of that organisation. And so he switched back to the team of Jean-René Bernadotte, and of course he's trying to pay them back very well here as we start to circumnavigate this area. A beautiful part of Belgium if you want to go for a bike ride, because these roads here are very narrow, only really almost wide enough for a car to get through, but they are great roads for riding bikes around. So now we're down to 3 riders, but look at the length of this main field. The main field now is certainly starting to take a serious interest, because this is the point of the race where normally we start to see the breaks appearing in the main peloton, and look how long that peloton is. Just looking a little bit further back here, I think we're still looking for the shape of Tom Bonen. 1 or 2 riders are certainly having a serious difficulty trying to keep themselves in contact, and in fact I think there's been a large group of riders shelled off the back of the main field as we look further and further back. You can see the team cars coming back one at a time, and I think we're actually still looking down there at Bonen. Yep, that is Tom Bonen. He's using his team car now. The referees will maybe take a little bit of a blind eye on this, because Bonin has had a mechanical incident. He stopped at the side of the road, and now he's trying to get himself back into this bike race. And obviously, being a Belgian in a Belgian race, I'm sure the Belgian referees will just look the other way and let him try and get himself back into the main field. But at speeds like this, it's going to be very, very difficult indeed for Tom Bonin to make the contact. Looking at the front end of the peloton, you can see the organisation, Team Radio Shack there. Over on the left-hand side, the orange jerseys of Rabobank, and not far from the front, BMC Racing. That's Marcus Burkhardt in the red and black jersey on the left-hand side there, a former winner of this race as well. They are looking after the chances today of Alessandro Ballan. A little bit further over, you can see Juan Antonio Fletcher. A very good start there. In fact, just peeping through there in the black and red jersey of BMC Racing is Alessandro Ballan. And not too far away, this is the chaos at the back end of the main field. There's Tomica, as they say, number 31, the big favourite for Quick Step. He's never really come back to the form that he had a couple of seasons ago, but he is a very big competitor when it comes to riding in these Belgian races. This is the chaos at the back end of the peloton. This is the area of Les Monts de Flandre, as they like to call them, the area not too far away from the Kemmelberg. Kemmelberg heavily featured in the First World War. So again, Tomica trying to get himself back into this race. It's been a very long, hard chase for Tom Bonin. He still hasn't quite... The referees are not actually being very kind to him currently, because they're leaving the gaps in the convoy of cars. There you can see the convoy of cars just in front of him, as we get the elastic bottle here, and this is the professional bottle. The race manager there will just hand the bottle over to Tom Bonin. He will accelerate and try and bring himself up to maximum speed. He's using every way that he can to get himself back into the peloton. And now you can see Bonin has actually done an exceptional job, because there is the main field. They've actually slowed down for a fraction, and that's what's allowed Tom Bonin to get himself back into the peloton. The reason they've slowed down, you can see they've blocked the whole road there. Nobody can get to the front and change the pace, and that really is because of the fact that everybody is waiting now until they get to the next big climb of the day. Teammate from Bonin coming up alongside him just to pace him over those last 40 or 50 metres and to get him back into the fold. Great roads around here. This race in the early part, when they move away from Deinze, they go up to the coast not too far away from Ostend, go along the coast down towards De Panne, and then back down into the southern part of this part of Belgium and into these very difficult hilly areas. They've got the Kattenberg, or the Mont des Cats as they called it in French, the Zwarteberg, the Black Mountain, Rodeberg, the Red Mountain, and of course the race is famed for its ascents of the Kemmelberg, which is a very nasty climb. Probably more dangerous is the descent of the Kemmelberg, because it goes straight down, and in previous years we've had some very, very nasty crashes. FDJ in the white jerseys, the French team of Marc Madier, all over the front of the peloton here, keeping themselves in an ideal position, and everybody now very concerned about their positioning as they run up towards the Kemmelberg. There is a beautiful view. We're actually not very far away from France here, and in fact if you go to the top of the Kemmelberg, right away to the west, you will get into France in around about 3 kilometers of riding. So although this is a very Flemish part of Belgium, we really are right on the linguistic border with France. A bit of chaos. The orange jerseys at the back of the peloton, Euskaltel-Euskadi, that's a team that we see much more often, very prominent in the big stage races, because that's the Basque team, and they are renowned for their big Spanish climbers. A slight lull in the chase now, as everybody realizes the next thing on the agenda is going to be a very important ascent of the next climb of the day. Over to the right hand side in the black jersey, Team Sky, they'll be looking after the chances today of Juan Antonio Fletcher, and he's over on the left hand side, and of course Edvald Bosenhagen, who's a previous winner of this bike race as well. Alessandro Ballan is sitting in second position there in the red and black jersey of Team BMC Racing, a former world champion for Italy, and he's battled to get himself back into form over the last couple of seasons. Back with the leading group now, Thomas Vogler in his national champions jersey. This is the small town of Kemmel, and that indicates that we're not too far away from the town of Kemmelberg. Voeckler, inimitable style of his as he starts to get up towards the start of this climb. He realizes this is an important part of the course. He started this breakaway very early on. They got a maximum advantage of 5 minutes after 70 kilometers. He's joined there by Romain Zingel of Team Cofidis and Stefan van Voren of Topsport. Albert Timmer, the rider who was with them originally in this 4-man breakaway, he's been left behind and he's caught currently in no man's land. So everybody looking over their shoulders left and right now. They know that very shortly they'll come into the small town not too far away from Kemmel, and then they will start the first serious climb of the day, the climb of the Zwarteberg, the Black Mountain. So Thomas Voeckler, he's a great character, Thomas Voeckler. Since he held the yellow jersey in the Tour de France a couple of years ago for 10 days, he was very, very dominant in resisting the attack of Lance Armstrong. On one occasion, he actually lost his lead in the yellow jersey on 7 different climbs of the day, and he pulled himself back into the race on every descent possible. And at the end of the day, he conserved, the final day he held the yellow jersey, he conserved it by around about 12 seconds. And Lance Armstrong actually went up to him afterwards and said, wait, if you have hung on to the yellow jersey quite as well as that, you really deserve it for one more day. However, Armstrong did take the jersey off him the following day and held it then all the way back up to Paris. So we're in the heart of the Heuvelland here. It was a magnificent part of the world for racing and for riding your bikes. Lots of races coming through this part of Belgium. Races like the 3 days of Le Panne, which very many riders use as preparation for the Tour of Flanders. He's an aggressive lad, isn't he, Thomas Voeckler? As you look at him here, trying to make sure that they keep on advantage as much as possible over the main field. Interesting story about Thomas Voeckler, because he actually grew up on the island of Guadeloupe in the Caribbean, the French island, and he raced with a lot of the cyclists in that part of the world down there before coming across to Europe. His father, strange story about his father, because his father was a doctor in the Guadeloupe, but he was a great yachtsman and he loved racing across the Atlantic, and he actually took a yacht from the Guadeloupe all the way back to France and disappeared, and he was never seen again. And Thomas Voeckler at that time, his mother had to bring him up as a lone parent, and she sent him off to France to race for Jean-René Bernado's development squad. And from that moment on, there was no looking back. And now all of a sudden, after turning professional way back in 2001, Thomas Voeckler has become one of the names of French cycling. These are nervous times now as everybody starts to look at the front end of the main field, left and right. The teams are, well, that's supposed to be Eddy Merckx over on the right-hand side of the road there. The Belgians really getting into the fun of Ghent-Wevelgem. That brown jersey there, the Maltini squad, was the team that Eddy Merckx rode for many, many seasons. This is life at the back end of the peloton. This is one of the reasons why you should not ride at the back end of a group on these small, narrow roads, because if you are here, there's absolutely no way you can get up to the front end of the pack. That's why they battle here in a situation like this to try and... That's Frédéric Guédon just sitting there right in the front of the main field. He's in the white jersey of FDJ. Française des Jeux, that's a team that's been around for an awful long time. They are always aggressive. Sylvain Chavanel for Quick-Step over on the right-hand side. He'll be looking after the interests of Tom Bonen, who, despite that very little mechanical incident he had early on, is back in the main field and now starting to look quite comfortable. Never far from the front end of the action either is Alessandro Ballan of Team BMC Racing. Look at that, there's hardly a space in the road where you can get yourself to the front end of the main field, and when you're like that, you've got to take a few risks in a race like this. You've got to move around there. That's, oh, look at that, to the Astana rider just over on the right-hand side. He went into the road, into the dirt there to try and get himself up to the front end of the pack. It is very, very difficult. Joost Postuma, this is a problem for a rider from Vacances Soleil at the back end of the main field. He as well went off the road slightly as he was trying to move himself up in the field. They're great roads, these are, for racing on. Very narrow, very exciting, but you do have to battle to hold on to position. If you touch your brakes at any point here, you'll find yourself going off the main field. If you were to take a left-hand turn there, by the way, over to the left-hand side of the picture, you would find yourself going very quickly into France. There's a slight mechanical problem there at the back, as one or two riders, they were forced to put the brakes on. They looked for the early exit and ended up going off the road. Back with the leaders. Still these three riders who have dominated this race since the 70th kilometre. It was all started by Thomas Voeckler, the French national champion there in the red, white and blue, looking to try and write his name. Voeckler's had a very good season so far this year. In fact, this I would have to say is one of his best seasons. He won the stage very early on in the Tour of the Mediterranean. He led that race for 2 days before he lost that. He won the Tour of the Haute Var as well, and then took 2 stages of Paris-Nice on stages 4 and 8. I'd have to say this so far has been the best season that Thomas Voeckler has had for a couple of years. Life at the back, you can see these are fantastic roads for racing on. Very narrow, very difficult, treacherous and tortuous, as many of these spectators have come here very early on, as we now start to get ourselves into the real heart of the Wevelgem. We're never really very much further than about 3 or 4 miles away. This is the Zwarteberg. The riders are making themselves up to the top of, not too far away from a small climb called Le Moulin, or the windmill, which is this is the rider who was in that breakaway I was telling you a little bit earlier on, Albert Timmer from Team Skill Shimano. So he's coming back into the main field, so that leaves the race situation as just 3 riders off the front, with Thomas Voeckler, Romain Zingler and Stefan van Voren. They are still holding on to around about a 30 to 45 second advantage. Over the top now, this is the red mountain, the Rodeberg. You can see the excitement now as they go over the top of the Rodeberg. They take this descent. They're now lining up. They all know that what is on the horizon is the very critical climb of the Kemmelberg. Kemmelberg featured very heavily in the First World War. In fact, if you go down to the bottom of the Kemmelberg, there's a cenotaph for the 5,000 soldiers that were defeated and killed in trying to defend just 50 meters of land, because the Kemmelberg really does control a majority of the site in this part of Belgium. There's the corner just at the top of the Rodeberg, around there, going over to the left-hand side. In previous years, they used to turn right there to go to get the Kemmelberg via the ascent of Loker. This time, they've gone to the left. They're heading down now, and they will go through the town of Kemmel before heading up to the Kemmelberg from the narrower side. So you can see there, that was Team Sky. There is that was a quick glimpse there of Bernie Eisel. Eisel is looking after Mark Cavendish. Now, this is one of the races that really does fall into the kind of style of racing that Mark Cavendish should be very good at. Cavendish not had a great start to the season. It's again been dogged by illness and injury in the early part of this year, but he's hoping that once again he'll get himself back to form for the big Grand Tours, races like the Giro d'Italia and of course the Tour de France. Nobody's shirking any of the workload here at all. Everyone sharing the pace. Zingler at the front here for Cofidis. Big strong rider from France, and obviously encouraged by the workload that's been put into this race by Thomas Voeckler. He's a real character, Thomas Voeckler. He turned professional, as I said, way back in 2001, and he's won around about 40 races throughout his career, and always from breakaways like this. He's a dominant rider. Only won 2 races last year, but of course one of those important races that he did win was the National Road Race Championships, and that was in June, just before the start of the Tour de France. Slight lull now before the storm, as everybody's got themselves into position. If you look at the colours of the jerseys, there's a lot of jerseys of the same colour getting themselves in groups at the front end of the peloton, and that's because everybody's trying to line themselves up to try and make sure they can get their teammates into an ideal position to start the next big climb of the day. Looks like Jeremy Hunt there in the black jersey of Team Sky. He'll be looking after Edvald Bosenhagen. That is not a very big main field, so 1 or 2 riders actually have been shelled off the back during the crosswind section of this course. When we come from De Panne on the coast down through Poperinge and down into this part of the Heuvelland. And you see, riders will take any kind of risk that they can when they want to try and get to the front. They know if you want to stay in with a child, that's very precarious there. There's a lot of danger in this part of the race here. Riders are taking risks. They're jumping onto the pavement here because they know there's only one way to move forward. They know they have to be at the front once they get up towards the Kemmelberg. Omega Pharma Lotto now starting to get themselves organised. They're looking after Andre Greipel. That's Greipel in 3rd position. He made the switch during the winter months as well there to switch across to his new team of Omega Pharma Lotto, former teammate of Mark Cavendish. Now this is a bit of a problem here. This looks like Lars Boom. Got his hand up in the air. He's looking for a spare wheel for it, and this is a really bad time to have a rear wheel puncture As he gets round that corner, waiting for the team car to come up alongside him. A bit of chaos going on now. Now there's a quick wheel change. The mechanic up alongside him. 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, we're looking at 7, 8 seconds. That's a very quick time change. Now, to change like that, you've not got to panic at all in a situation like this. You've got to wait for the mechanic and the team car to come up alongside you, get off the bike. Don't show any sign of panic at all, because when the bike rider starts to panic, that puts a little bit of panic into the feeling of the mechanic, and he makes mistakes. That mechanic did not make any mistakes at all there as we start to look down. In fact, it wasn't Lars Boom. Lars Boom was just sitting at the back of the main field. He put his hand up to indicate to his team car that there was a problem and he wanted them to come forward, but he is sitting at the back here, looking over his shoulder, waiting to see whether or not his teammate is going to come back into the pack. Keeping himself topped up with energy. Rabobank, a great squad, Rabobank. They've raced all over the world. I saw them very early on. They were very, very dominant in the early season Santos Tour Down Under. That's Andre Greipel in the middle there with Lotto written on his shoulders. A very strong bike rider being looked after today. And this is interesting because that's Philippe Gilbert just alongside him there. And obviously Philippe Gilbert, he is riding the work today of a teammate, and he's looking after his own teammate Andre Greipel, because this is very much regarded as a sprinter's race. And also riding to the front, I noticed there for Team Leopard Trek, Daniele Benati, the Italian sprinter. So now Thomas Voeckler very keen to go to the front. He's always happy to do the pacemaking. It's a beautiful part of Belgium, this, right the way down, not too far away from Poperang, and of course if you cross over the border here, not too far away from Hasbrook and Amiens, the little towns in the northern part of France. Narrow roads here. Just over onto the left-hand side, that is the climb of the Kemmelberg. There were so many horrendous battles. If you know the town of Ypres, or Wipers as they called it in the old days, there was massive battles here during the First World War, the 1914-18 war, the Great War, which everybody said would end all wars. And unfortunately, that hasn't been the case. Gert Stegeman's in the middle for Quick Step. He's obviously looking after his teammate this afternoon, and that, of course, is Tom Boonen. Philippe Gilbert just behind him in the black jersey. That's Matty Heyman from Team Sky. And a third-place finish in Ghent, in the Nieuwsblad race in the early part of the season. Marcus Burkhardt is the rider from BMC. Look at the chaos now as everybody, they don't want to be riding with the wind in their faces, but they want to be in the 4th or 5th position. Now we're not too far. You can just see the car turning right. This is the start of the Kemmelberg for the first time. So Zingel is the rider in the red jersey of Cofidis. He will make the corner. No, will he? Because now you can see Thomas Voeckler wants to go around that corner in first place. Right, now here they go. It's a long, hard climb this, and having battered those massive gears over the first part of this course, the riders are now going to the complete other end of their gear cluster and getting to probably a gear of around about 38 tooth chainring on the inside to a 21 or a 22 sprocket on the back. Voeckler, look at a crowd here. This is a phenomenal crowd in Ghent Wevelgem this afternoon. You might just notice that the rider from Vlaanderen Top Sport just sitting on the back there. He's having a pretty difficult time, is Steven van Voorden. Top Sport Vlaanderen, though, I have to say they're a great squad. They've been a real development squad for Belgian cycling over the last... Oh, there's a problem at the back here. This is Mark Cavendish. Mark Cavendish has had a problem there. His teammate was up alongside him very quickly, and this is not a great time to have a flat tyre. So Mark Cavendish is going to start the Kemmelberg right at the back end of the main field, and now that is not good for the British man. The man from the Isle of Man. As Voeckler here stamps his authority here on the Kemmel. Now this might look like the steep part of the climb, but I can tell you from experience it is not. It's once you start to get around the corner that all of a sudden this climb starts to get steeper. It's a real nasty climb, the Kemmelberg. It starts off with a steady gradient. As you get closer to the summit, it gets harder and harder. So wearing number 218, that's Roman Zingel. They cannot look at this. The crowd, they love this race. The great thing about coming to Ghent Wevelgem is you can come down here to this part of the course here in the Kemmelberg area, and you can see the race come round on a couple of occasions. And not too far away from the top of the climb, there's a very, very nice little cafe where once the riders have gone by, you can run in there for a cold beer, a cold Belgian beer, and you can watch the race on a big screen. So almost to the top of the climb, over the summit there of the Kemmelberg. They will go round and they will come back to do this climb one more time. Now, in previous years, they've gone straight over the top and down the other side, but it turns out that the climb was very, very dangerous indeed. So what the organisers have done, they've found another smaller road over to the left-hand side, which takes the riders off the Kemmelberg nice and safely. Now then, look at this. This is Philippe Gilbert in the front for Omega Pharma Lotte. He takes the riders around that corner in first position. I don't think he's riding for himself here this afternoon. He's thinking a lot more about his own teammate, and that, of course, is Andre Greipel. Not far behind him, you can just see in third position, Tom Bonen. Bonen is a master of these little cobble climbs in Belgium. Gilbert all over his machine, the power that Gilbert has got. He's turning out to be a phenomenal bike rider this season, Philippe Gilbert. He really is a man that a lot of people are expecting to shine when we come to the Belgian Ardennes. He started the year off with a very good victory in the Tour of the Algarve. Then he won the Strada Bianca in Italy, and he won the 5th stage of Tirreno Adriatico. Now, look at him. He's looking over his shoulder. He's looking to see the whereabouts of his own teammate, Andre Greipel. But he really is stamping his authority over this race. Juan Antonio Fletcher is following him. Third place there is Tom Boden. Great fourth position there for Matty Heyman. As we look a bit further back now to see the sort of damage. That's Tyler Farrar, the American. Now, this is Mark Cavendish. Cavendish is off the back end, and that's because of that mechanical incident that he had when he was going through the little town of Kemmel. But can he get himself back into the race? Tyler Farrar, the American sprinter, he's not too far away from the front end of the main field. As we can see, Philippe Gilbert is really stamping his authority on this climb, but there's no gap starting to... Matty Heyman is having a wonderful season so far after third place in the recent Het Nieuwsblad. He's at the front end of the pack here. Over to the right-hand side, that's the little cafe area I was telling you about. It's a magnificent place. If you get a chance to come and watch the Ghent Wevelgem race, this is the place to come. The atmosphere is electric. So as we look down there, there's no major gap starting to appear as we speak. But certainly once they come round here for the second time, then all of a sudden this race is going to start to split up. Now then, this is Heyman. Now, Heyman has taken the advantage here to try and get himself off the front end of the pack. No, it's not Heyman. In fact, it's his teammate. There's Fletcher in the main pack there in their black and blue jersey. He's looking very comfortable. Also, Bradley Wiggins is near the front end of the pack as well, the British national champion. He also rides for Team Sky. Now, this is Cavendish, number 3. Great sprinter. A very slow start to the season, I have to say, for Cavendish. He really did have a bit of difficulty very early on. He did get himself a stage victory in the Tour of Oman. That was the 6th stage. But since then he's been scuttling around trying to find himself some form, and it's very difficult on this circuit around here, around the Kemmel, to try and get yourself back into the race if you have a mechanical incident. But he's almost got himself to the back end of the main field, but he's got to do that before they get off the descent of the Kemmel. Now, as these riders turn to the left, in previous years, that's where the race used to go straight on, but it was much too dangerous, especially if it was a little bit wet, and we've seen some very nasty crashes on the descent of the Kemmel from that side, and it's a very steep descent. In fact, there's no way of manoeuvring. This is the so-called safer descent there. There's Cavendish going around that corner. It's one of his teammates there, just a wrist there by Cavendish. One of his teammates is sitting on the back end of the pack. Now, what he will try and do, you see, he looks over his shoulder, the rider just in front of Cavendish there, every now and again trying to see whether or not he can pace Cavendish back into the pack. Because if this comes down to a bunch sprint, there's not many riders left in the world who have got the speed of the man from the Isle of Man. Now then, it is Matty Heyman. So Heyman, great individual time trialist, the Commonwealth gold medalist from 2006. He's trying to force a little group up the front end of the main field here. He's being chased down by Saxo Bank and BMC Race. That looks like George Hincapie. It is George Hincapie. Hincapie, also a former winner of this race, Ghent Wevelgem. Hincapie knows that if you can get into a breakaway situation around here, you've got a very, very good chance of opening up the gap. And that gap is starting to appear. So, off the top of the Kemmel, down into the Heuvelland. If you want to ride around this area, there's very, very nice sign, and that looks like Nick Noyen's So now this is looking like a very serious move here. Hincapie looks over his shoulder. Former American national road racing champion, and he now knows that this is a good move, because with Nick Noyens and with Matty Hayman, this is going to put some serious pressure onto the breakaway. And I'd kind of forgotten, of course, that there is still a breakaway off the front end of Ghent Wevelgem here this afternoon, led, of course, still by Thomas Vogt. He always looks like he's in pain. He always looks like he can't get enough pressure out of his body as he looks over his shoulder. That Zingle in third position, Van Voren of Topsport Vlaanderen in second place there. And they're still holding on to a slight advantage over the peloton, but they must now know that the race is on behind them. So as you look down at this race, you can now start to see the gaps are starting to appear in the peloton. Everybody, I think they'll see the alarm bell starting to ring because of the presence of George Hincapie and Nick Noyens in that breakaway. As the helicopter skirts around, what we're looking for here is the breakaway of three riders. The three riders who've had a lot of pressure put on them by the presence of Thomas Vogt. That's the chasing group of three with George Hincapie in it. There is the main field, or what remains of the main field, if I could say. And as they wing their way around, look at these roads. They're very narrow roads, very tricky roads for a main field to control the pacemaking. Stretched out into an extremely long line as they go right down here to the Heuvelland. Hincapie. Hincapie has participated in 14 Tours de France, and he's hoping this year to participate in the Tour de France on another occasion. And if he does, he will equal the number of participations of Joop Zoetemelk. And that is 15, and that would be a remarkable participation for Hincapie. Hasn't won a race since 2009, when he had a very good win in the National Road Racing Championships of the United States, and that was in August of 2009. But Hincapie is much more of a team captain for Team BMC, and one of the reasons that Cadel Evans actually made the switch across to BMC was he wanted to race alongside George Hincapie, because Hincapie has so much knowledge to offer a team because of the fact that he's ridden every one of the top races around the world. Somebody's just popped across there. There's a rider from Radio Shack has seen that, but there's the main peloton. They're not too far behind. They're scurrying, and in fact it's interesting to see that that was a rider from Team Sky doing the pacemaking on the front there, despite the fact that they've got a man called Matty Hayman. And Hayman here, this is him on the front in the black and blue jersey of Team Sky. A great Aussie cyclist. Certainly he's a strong man to have on anybody's team as Nick Noyens looks across. This is not too far. This is the small climb called the Kattenberg, or the climb of the cats. And then they'll go over the Monteberg. They're narrow climbs, they're short climbs, but they have an effect of really breaking into a rider's morale as Noyens here gets into that very precarious, low-profile slipstream position here. But they've now, although it was looking like a very good move, they've not got much more than 4 or 5 seconds off the front end of the main field, and Hincapie comes by there in the red jersey, trying to whip up the pacemaking if he can. Just looking back. Well, in fact, I tell you what, the problem is the camera here really does foreshorten the gap, so they're actually looking at probably about 10 to 12 seconds, and that's the world champion. That is Thor Hushovd from Norway. Amazing to think Norway doesn't have very many professional cyclists, him and Edvald Bosenhagen, but they are two of the top professional cyclists in the world. As seeing the possibility of a little move there, Thor Hushovd also looking to get himself a slight advantage for the next time they come up to start the climb of the Kemmel. That's, well, look at that. 4 riders now starting to join this leading group of riders. Hushovd is coming right across the gap. He's got fine form. He hasn't had a very good start to the season, and everybody starts to talk about the curse of the rainbow jersey. Well, for Thor Hushovd, he won this title towards the end of last year. He was integrated into the Garmin Cervelo team, a team which was brought together by the coalition of Garmin and Cervelo test team, and it's starting to look, or well, we talk on paper of it being one of the top classic squads. And now, when you see the world champion getting into a breakaway like this, this is a very good move. There's the small town of Loker. The gap from that 5-man group now is only 5 or 6 seconds, and let's not forget there is still that 3-man breakaway off the front end of this race, inspired by Thomas Vogt. This is the feeding station. Matty Hayman looked over his shoulder. Hincapie He knows that if they can get to the climb again, you've always got the advantage. Even if it's only for 4 or 5 seconds, if you start the Kemmel on the last time, it's very important. Now this is the back in the race. This, number 3, is Mark Cavendish. Cavendish is inspired by this race. The last time a British rider won this race, it was Barry Hoban way back in 1974. Sean Yates finished in 2nd place a couple of years ago, and that was when he got in the long breakaway with Gerrit Solleveld. Bernie Eisel there, number 5, talking to the lads. Come on, get yourselves organised. Let's get Cavendish back into this bike race because we've got a good chance here. Little hand sling there to try and get Cavendish up to the main field. Been a long, hard chase. I would put that down at a 15-kilometre chase for Mark Cavendish, but he's a strong man. He's a very good bike rider when it comes down to sprinting. We regard him as being one of the fastest men in the world, Mark Cavendish. Teammates all around him. Now he's got the time just to relax a fraction, try and get his breath back. Now, oh, chasing the torch. Tom Bonan has come up to this group. Now this is starting to look very serious indeed now, because we're looking here at Hincapie, Matty Heyman, Nick Noyens, Thor Hushovd. This is a good move. There's a rider scuttling across the gap there for Team Astana, because they now started to realise this could be the time when the race breaks up. So, powering along now. In fact, that isn't Bonan, that was like Stegmans who's come into this move. Stegmans looks over his shoulder. They've got a gap now, and you can see they're splintering at the front end of the main field. And the main field, I think, hasn't just gone through the feeding station, have decided this is, oh dear me, Mark Cavendish. I thought he'd got back onto the peloton here, but he hasn't. There you can see him, still got his teammates. His teammates are riding over towards the middle of the road. They're trying to shelter Cavendish, wearing number 3 there from the wind as much as possible. You're really scuttling, you're really taking risks at a moment like this. And just looking up in the top there, that is the Red Mountain, the Rodeberg. Now, if you go up to the top of that mountain and turn left, you'd be very quickly on the border of France. So this is a good workmanlike group, and still, let's not forget, you've still got that 3-man breakaway off the front end of the main field, and that breakaway inspired by Thomas Voeckler, joined by Zingel of Team Cofidis, and in there Van Voren as well, but they are now starting to have their advantage eaten into by the front end of this main field. Matty Heyman looks over his shoulder. He's not really riding for himself. Matty Heyman is a great domestique. Now look, there's riders scuttling across this gap now one by one as you get a chance to see. These are the real racing roads of Flanders here. That's the breakaway that's halfway across the gap. Still well organised, still doing a very good job. And I think that was Philippe Gilbert has got himself across the gap there. So some big names starting to see and starting to prize an advantage over the peloton here this afternoon. Stegmans in the blue and white jersey of Quickstep looks over to the left-hand side. Hincapie very aggressive. As soon as it slows down, Hincapie wants to come forward and try and whip up the pacemaking. Followed by Heyman and Thor Hushovd. Hushovd won a stage in the Tour de France last year. Had a very quiet season. He won a stage of the Vuelta as well way back in September of last year. But so far this season, he really doesn't have very much to shout about. He's still looking for his form, having come across to join a brand new squad. Well, the sun is starting to peek through the clouds. It was very cold at the start this morning, grey and dismal Belgian roads, as this is starting to look like a pretty serious breakaway beginning to form. We've got here 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 riders, and they'll be chasing the 3 riders who are still leading this race by between 35 and 45 seconds. Next group, this is the main peloton. Nobody yet showing themselves. There's Bradley Wiggins at the back there, the British national champion. Now there's another small group starting to come across, about 7 riders there, and they've seen the possibility of look at it. It really is a magnificent part of Belgium for racing, and these roads in the summertime, and they're very, very quiet. You will never see a car on any of these roads at all, and if you want to come for a cycling holiday, it's not a bad part of Belgium to come to. The roads are ideal, they're narrow, no cars. The only thing that will buffet you if you come for a bike ride around here will be the wind, because it's windy almost every day of the year. So that group of 7 have been pulled back by the peloton. Still a very large peloton now as they wind their way around the Heuvelland, waiting for the next ascent of the Kemmel. If you look at the trees there, you can see it, although we're talking about it being springtime, but the seeds and the flowers have not yet started to bud and not yet started to open up. It really is the early part of the season here. So everybody quite happy to move, and I think the presence there, let's just have a look, there's a little bit of an incident there, and in fact just over to the left hand side there, somebody had to put his brakes on very rapid. I think that is Andre Greipel, who went around the corner there. He was trying to take a few risks coming up on the inside, and then all of a sudden he spotted, in fact there was a spectator in front of him. So lest we forget, this is the three-man breakaway. This is Thomas Voeckler, Zingel in second position. Just behind him, Van Voren. Voeckler digging deep, looking for a little bit of help from the other riders in this breakaway, and he realizes none of these guys in the breakaway are quite as strong as Thomas Voeckler. As I said, he's had a very good start to the season, and of course he's done extremely well for his brand new team, Team Europcar. Europcar came in at the very last minute to save Jean-René Bernardot's team from extinction. It's a team that's been around for an awful long time. It started off actually as a development squad of the team Vendée U, which is sponsored by a great big supermarket, and they built themselves up from being a development team into what is now a very good, fully fledged professional cycling team. Now this is the top of the Zwaarteberg, the Black Mountain. They're turning off to the right hand side there. They go around a little loop which will take them by the windmill at the top of the Zwaarteberg and the Rodeberg. This was a road that the race used to take in many years ago. There is the area at the top. It's just like a little resort area, a summer resort area for the Belgians to come to. As you can see now, another move coming off the front. Astana now have decided this is the moment to try and whip up the pacemaking. It's a nasty, steep little dig, this climb. It comes off the main road, you go up past the windmill. In fact, it's only like a little 1 kilometre excursion off the main road between the Zwaarteberg and the Rodeberg, and you come back on, there's the windmill there, over on the left-hand side. Take a left and then very quickly come back onto exactly the same road that you were on just previously, and then you've got the fast descent off the Rodeberg, or the Red Mountain. And if you turned left there, you would go back to the point where these riders just turned off the main road just a few moments ago. There's a very nice little hotel just at the top of this climb as well, called the Zanneken. And in previous years, a lot of the teams have been and stayed at the top of this climb for their training programs. Not much wind. You can see the flags there rippling a fraction. The wind is not the major problem here this afternoon. It was a little earlier in the day. Oh, there's a problem here. Somebody from Landbau Credit had a problem at the back end of the peloton there, as they go away from the top of the windmill. So this is the back end of the peloton as they themselves now head onto the road. This is the climb of the Rodeberg, or the descent of the Rodeberg, just over the top, a little bit of the flat, and then they will drop down and turn left and head back down towards the town of Kemmel. And just a little bit of a split in the peloton here, and you can see the riders, they're just scuttling to stay on the wheel of the rider in front of them. Well, Matty Heyman is still dishing out the pain. There's the sign there for the Rodeberg, the Red Mountain. We drop away, and again this year we're turning to the left at the bottom. In previous years we've gone to the right hand side there and down to Loka, and very quickly over the Monteberg and then up to the summit of the Kemmelberg. Now there's a move. I wonder if that's Matty Heyman going again. Looks like the black jersey of Team Sky. Again, we're still trying to... No, this is looks like Jeremy Hunt has made a move here. It's followed there by Geert Stegeman. Hunt, a former two-time British professional road racing champion, not too far behind Stegeman. You can just see the shape there of Tom Bonen. Everyone's getting very nervous now. They're probably starting to think that the next time we come to the Kemmelberg, it could be the decisive time, and that's when we might start to see the split happen. There's a lot of movement in the peloton as the riders moving left and right and just waiting for the moment. And they've still got to do a little bit of work before they pull back Thomas Voeckler and his breakaway. That breakaway group of Thomas Voeckler at one stage had a maximum advantage of around about the 5-minute margin. That was Sylvain Chavanel on the front for Quick Step. It's still a very large peloton, I have to say, but there is a split. There's a split in the main field now. You can see that was all because of that little circuitous route around the windmill climb. And that's where the main field split a fraction. And it really is very difficult. Once we get to this part of the race, it's very hard indeed to start to claw back those gaps. Riders going to the front, they're all very happy. You go down here from the Rodeburg down to the Kleedje. From the Kleedje, you take a right-hand turn and then head around the bottom of the climb of the Kemmel into the town of Kemmel, and then we're going to face that right-hand turn again over the Kemmel for the final time, and then it's a long, hard chase back towards the finish in Wevelgem. These are the riders who have been caught out by that split, struggling to keep themselves in contact here. It's not a big main field, and I'll tell you what, if you're caught off the back at a moment like this, you really have a moment of panic, because you realize, look at that, people taking risks left and right. There's a car park right in the middle of the road there, but in fact that's the normal parking place. The riders have used the cycle path there to try and move themselves, to place themselves in the top 10-15 positions as we start to head back down towards Kemmel. It's a big main field. There's still all of the sprinters who feel they've got a very good chance here. In fact, Mark Cavendish has managed to get himself back into the peloton after a very long, hard chase. So the man from the Isle of Man, the Manx Missile, is in the main field, and he'll be hoping that he can survive over the Kemmel for the next time, because for him, he'll be looking at opening up his account with a great victory here in the Ghent Wevelgem Classic. Still with the leaders, Vogler. Over 40 wins to his credit over a career that spends now over 10 years. An experienced rider, but never afraid of going into a long breakaway like this. A pretty serious advantage, despite the pressure that's being put on in the main field by a lot of riders, especially the riders from Quick-Step. And I would still say we are looking here at an advantage of, well, it's still hovering at 30 to 45 seconds. You can just get a glimpse of the main field in the background there, and these riders will not give up, because I know that Vogler in the back of his mind is thinking that if they can survive out towards the Kemmel and get over the Kemmelberg for a final time, there will probably be a split in the main field of 30 or 40 riders going clear, and that will give it a little bit of an advantage for Thomas Vogler, because it will bring reinforcements up from the rear. Oh, another problem, Philippe Gilbert. Gilbert has had a problem. He had a quick wheel change there with his teammate. He's got a big gear going here as Gilbert, the French-speaking Belgian rider. It's just over, look at this. It was over on the right-hand side. Now, this is why you have to have a teammate in a race like this. His teammate has stopped very, very quickly. He saw the problem. The teammate is taking out his back wheel, puts the back wheel into the machine of Philippe Gilbert. Then all of a sudden, Gilbert is up and running, but he's got nobody with him currently to help him get back into the peloton. Team car up alongside him. A little bit of a tweak for the rear brakes, and always amazes me when any time you put a wheel into a bike like this, these professional bike riders, they always manage to make sure that the brake is badly adjusted, and that I have to say is a little bit of a professional foul. Gilbert getting into that tuck decision. You can see there's nobody in the gap to help him currently. He's got to get across this gap on his own. He does have the advantage, though, that we're looking at 3 or 4 kilometers before we get to the next climb of the Kemmelberg. And as it looks to me as if the main field has slowed down a fraction. He doesn't need the elastic bottle here this afternoon. So Philippe Gilbert, wearing number 41, is back in the main field. The fact that these races are all across the road at the moment is an indication that the pressure is not yet on again. They will start to tweak up the pressure once we start to approach the Kemmel, because I think this time we are likely to see a decision being made on the slopes of the Kemmel. It's a very flat part of Belgium here, and these are the only climbs in the area, the little climbs of the Heuvelland, including the Kemmelberg, the Zwaarteberg, Rodeburg, not too far away, the Kattenberg, which is actually in France, the Mont des Cats. As a couple of riders now themselves trying to see if they can prize a slight advantage over the peloton before we go into Kemmel again. But the main field, they're not concerned about these. These are like flies, swatting flies, as you might say. These little moves, they're not going to do anything at all to affect the momentum of the main peloton. The peloton knows what they want to do, and they know when they need to make the moves. This is the town of Kemmel. Little cobbled streets around the town square now as Thomas Voeckler still, look at the way he nods that bike in. Really is trying to get that pressure out. He knows if they can survive it. He's about 1.5 kilometers now to go to the Kemmel for the final time. And what he's hoping is to get onto the Kemmel in the first position. Because if he can, and they could possibly survive, the idea is that a breakaway group will form this time on the Kemmelberg, forcing maybe 20, 30 riders off the front end of the pack. And it could be then the decisive move, whether we then start to line ourselves up for the ride back towards Wevelgem. Look at the chaos. This is serious chaos. There's all of these riders here. Oh, there's a problem at the back there. Again, it looks as if a rider had a little bit of a technical problem at the back end of that group. As we now start to come through Kemmel with the main field. I have got this gap now down to approximately 30 seconds between the 3 leaders and the front end of the main field. Now let's just have a look, and this is the problem at the back. And in fact, that was Bradley Wiggins there. Bradley Wiggins, and he's stopped at the side of the road, and it looks as if, well, Wiggins has obviously gone down because he's got a big dirty patch on the back of his jersey there. He's wearing the jersey of the British National Road Racing Champion. Ooh, now, as we start to climb up towards the Kemmel, Zingel has gone off the back, the rider from Cofidis. He can't take the pressure of Thomas Voeckler anymore. So too Van Voren is having a very difficult time. He's a great rider, sir, little Thomas. Thomas the Tank. Out of the saddle, he is just riding at his own tempo here. He knows this is going to be the decisive climb. The second climb of the Kemmel is always the decisive time when we come up there. Sergei Ivanov was the rider from Katusha, not too far away from the front, just looking over, looking for his teammates. This time there will be a big battle. Now Thomas Voeckler is on the climb. He now is lining up for the final ascent of the Kemmel here this afternoon. Nodding around on that machine of his. He's getting a little bit more energy into his pedaling stroke by bouncing the top half of his body and forcing those pedals down again. It's a tough old climb, this. He'll be in the lowest gear that he's got as he bounces. He's a popular rider, Thomas Voeckler, ever since he wore that yellow jersey in the Tour de France. 10 days in succession. It's the second time, in fact, that he's been the National Road Racing Champion of France. And in fact, he was the National Road Race Champion when he took the yellow jersey in the Tour and held off Lance Armstrong for 10 days. Looking over his shoulders, he knows he's got the gap now. He knows he's not going to ride to the finish in a race like this because Thomas Voeckler realises that once they get over the summit of the climb this time, the teams, the sprinters, will start to wind up the pressure. Voeckler. Again, just consistently checking over his shoulder to see what type of a gap he's got over the other riders, the remnants of the breakaway. It was initially a 4-man breakaway that 70 kilometres into the race had a maximum advantage of 5 minutes. But I think because of the presence of Thomas Voeckler in that breakaway, the teams didn't give him that much of an advantage. They pegged it at 5 minutes, and as we've got now down to this very critical part of the race, they're starting to peg him back just that little bit more. But Voeckler, he's got the power in his legs here this afternoon. Once you start to see that tarmac surface there, you know you're not too far away from the front end of this race. Van Voren is the next man to come up towards the top, but his style is just that little bit more laboured, and the main field, they're on the climb too. So Van Voren, second in the race. Now here comes the moves. It still looks like Matty Heyman up to the front end of the peloton. Juan Antonio Fletcher not too far away either. A little bit further back, there's Thor Hushovd, the world champion. Tom Bonin is coming through as well. I'm looking a little bit further back to see what the position is. That's Bernie Eisel going through in the white jersey. So not too far away, we should see Mark Cavendish. I'm looking down this line of riders to see if Cavendish has recovered from that early mechanical incident. So the race has not split up as much as I expected it to on this second ascent of the Kemmel. I have a feel, I think I just spotted Cavendish going through there. So there in third position in that line of riders, that's Hushovd. Bernati just behind him for Team Leopard Trek. A little bit further back, we're still looking to see there is Bernie Eisel. He's won this race in the past. As we look down, further down this line of riders, there Gert Stegemans from Quickstep in the blue and white jersey. He's now starting the descent of the Kemmel. I didn't see Mark Cavendish in that group at all, and that's a little bit of a surprise because the whole of the team stopped to try and pace him back into the group. precarious corners. They're great roads for riding on here. I'm not quite sure if I'd want to race around these corners quite as fast as these guys are going, because you've got to take serious risks if you want to stay in contact with the peloton. In fact, there is not a gap in that main field, so pretty much most of the main field is intact as they go over the Kemmelberg for the final time. Looking down, and you start to see this is a big main field this afternoon. Rarely could I say that I've seen such a large group of riders together as we now start to see the moves happening. This is Thomas Voeckler. He's on his own. He's got the gap now that he was looking for, and now he's got to try and figure out whether or not he's got the energy left to ride a long solo effort back down towards the finish. I would say we're looking at around about 32 kilometers to go to the finish line. Everyone looking around for a little bit of assistance. Matty Heyman in 4th or 5th position. Over on the right hand side, that black jersey there, that's Juan Antonio Fletcher. Nice move there by BMC. This is again a sort of an illicit feeding station. There's a couple of cars parked over to the left hand side there. Juan Antonio Fletcher looks back to see what sort of damage. He's got assistance there coming from Thor Hushovd. Daniele Benati is the next rider through from Leopard Trek. Not decided yet, these riders. I think we're still looking, I think Van Voren has been pulled back into the fold, so the race situation is just one lone leader, Thomas Voeckler, the French national champion, and the rest of the main field. Pipo Pozzato moving to the front there as well. He's the Italian rider, former Italian national champion. Now the move coming from Liquigas. Big acceleration now. This is the moment when everyone's thinking, we've got to put the hammer down. We've come over the climbs. Now's the chance to try and form a small group of 5 or 6 riders, and that would give them a chance of stealing the glory away from the sprinters. This race has always been regarded as a race for the sprinters, very much like Milano-San Remo in the early part of the season. That race is in March. This race for many years has been the domain of the sprinters, despite the fact that we've got all of these climbs. It's such a long way from the climbs to the finish line that the sprinters usually manage to scurry their way back into an event like this. Lampre have got themselves a little bit of a gap. They're being chased by Matty Heyman in 3rd position. Around these corners, taking the risks to try and open up the gap if they can. We're still, Thomas Voeckler, in fact, we keep forgetting about Voeckler, but Voeckler is still holding on to around about a 30-second advantage over this main field. And despite the speed, despite the fact that the peloton is stretched out into a very long line, they are not doing anything at all to pull back the little Frenchman. Here he is, Voeckler, Champion de France. Europe car is the new, oh, there's the main field now. In fact, that 30-second time gap we got a few moments ago, I would say now is down to about 15 seconds. Every time this road straightens out, they get a very good chance of seeing Voeckler around these corners. Sky digging very deep, a little bit further back. I just noted Tyler Farrar was there, the American sprinter. He's not too far away. He loves these Belgian races. He's a tough competitor, Farrar. I think he's really come to a little bit of maturity over the last couple of seasons, and he's really turning out to be one of the great American sprinters. And I have to say, when you talk about a guy like Davis Finney, who was the most winningest professional in the United States with more than 500 victories to his credit, I think Tyler Farrar is coming right up alongside the reputation of a man like Finney. Nick Noyens, Saxo Bank in the pale blue jersey there. Little dig for him. These little inclines now are the times when you've got a very good chance of trying to prise open a gap over the peloton. And everybody is scuttling. They don't want to give anybody an inch at a moment like this. What they do want to do, though, is pull themselves back to Thomas Voeckler. I think it's pretty much over for Voeckler, because when you see the way these attacks are starting to come now thick and fast, they'll be eating into that advantage of Voeckler, which is hovering on the 15-second mark now. But this, again, you can see that the pressure is starting to come onto this race, because every time you see these little attacks, they start to show gaps appearing in the peloton. Voeckler now down to not much more than 5 or 6 seconds. That's the referee just behind him on that motorbike, keeping a close eye on the way the race is unfolding. Vogler descending off the top here. This is a climb that the racer used to go over many years ago, called the Monteberg. That's behind the riders. A left-hand turn now. We're not too far away from Wevelgem. Oh, it's all over for Vogler. With that last little corner there, he just wiped away. His advantage has been just written off the slate. Looks back over his shoulder and he knows it's all over now for Thomas Vogler. A little bit more glory once again for the Frenchman. A serious competitor, a great competitor, always aggressive. He never looks at the race handbook for tactics. He rides with his gut and rides with his instinct. And today it's almost paid off. But at around about 30 kilometers to go, it's Gruppo Compacto, everything back together. Now you can see Liquigas, they are very concerned about the position of their young rider, Peter Sagan. He's just 22 years of age, and what's going on here? Well, this is at the back now. They're over on the right-hand side. There's a little problem there. That was Danilo Hondo. He's a good sprinter. Normally we regard him as being the lead-out man for Alessandro Patacchi, but when you have a problem at a time like this, now just look behind these riders. Because of the split, the team cars are a long way behind. So if you have a mechanical incident at a point like this, don't even think about getting back into the race, because it could be a minute or a minute and a half you're standing by the side of the road waiting for the team car to come and service you. Now this is another nice little move here. Liquigas feel that this is a good occasion for them. They've dragged across their man Sagan. Just having a quick look at the rider from Quick-Step there. It looked very much to me like the shape of Sylvain Chavanel. Just looking across again, you see Sylvain Chavanel. He's a French rider. He rode for many seasons on the Team Cofidis roster, but he decided he wanted to learn his Chavanel there, and he wanted to get himself into a Belgian team to learn the ropes of how to ride these one-day classics, and that's why he decided to come across to Team Quick-Step, and he's been a serious ally over the last couple of seasons to Tom Bonen. Chavanel sees this as a great opportunity. That's Sagan in first position there. Amazing to think this kid has been around for a very long time, and he is actually only 22 years of age. I think he's a young rider we will talk about an awful lot in the future. Not only has he got himself an extremely good sprint, but he actually can get himself over the climbs, which gives him a slight advantage over one or two of the other sprinters. I think that's Matty Hayman in second position. He's all over these races. He really seems to have come to some kind of form this season, after he and his teammate Juan Antonio Fletcher finished in second and third place in the race of the opening race of the season in Belgium. And that, of course, was the Het Nieuwsblad. So we're now looking at a very interesting group of four riders. Sylvain Chavanel is the rider from Quick-Step, but Ian Stannard gets in there for Team Sky in the black jersey, and of course Peter Sagan is the rider from Liquigas Cannondale. He's joined by his teammate Bodnar. Now this has put the cat amongst the pigeons here. They're looking at around about a 10 to 15 second advantage, but the fact that a rider like Sylvain Chavanel is in that breakaway group really is starting to make the main field react very vigorously. Sagan on the left. Came to prominence last year when we saw him win a couple of stages of the Paris-Nice, followed by a couple of stages of the Amgen Tour of California. Now there you can see the main field behind them scuttling all over the road, left and right, trying to get themselves organised. The big powerhouse, I would have to say, in this breakaway though is Sylvain Chavanel. Chavanel won two stages of the Tour de France last year. Wore the yellow jersey on two occasions as well. As now you can start to see this little move started to get themselves organised. It's Philippe Gilbert on the front. Obviously he's not riding for himself here this afternoon. Behind him it's Matty Hayman. Oh, and a big move there. This is Philippe Gilbert. I was saying he wasn't riding for himself, but he realises now's the time to close down the gap on a man like Peter Sagan. And in close attention there, the world champion Thor Hushovd. He's up into fourth or fifth position. These are the little narrow roads as we take ourselves away from the Herveland part of Belgium to get back to the main road, which will take the riders at speeds of 45 kilometers an hour back into the very heart of Wevelgem. Gilbert strong bike rider, great bike rider, really has changed in the last couple of seasons as we start to see him doing all of the pacemaking. But this is obviously for his own teammate. He's thinking about the possible victory this afternoon for his man, and that of course is going to be Andre Greipel, the big sprinter. Opened up his season extremely well, did Gilbert, with a very good win in the Tour of the Algarve on the opening stage, then a very incredible win in Italy in the Strada Bianca, which is almost a Paris-Roubaix style race over a lot of dirt roads. He knows that on these narrow little climbs here, there's always the possibility of forcing a gap, and so too does Thor Hushovd. Many people regard Thor Hushovd as a sprinter, but he's actually a very aggressive rider, and a lot of the races that he's won in his career have been from a breakaway group or a small group of riders as he swings over. He's been very much marked there. In third place there, that's Daniele Bernati, and they're chasing down this leading group of 4 riders. Stannard of the United Kingdom, he's in the black jersey of Team Sky. Sagan and Bodnar from Liquigas Cannondale, and of course from Quick Step, the Belgian team with the French rider Sylvain Chavanel. Movistar, they've pulled off the front now. This is always the chance which gives the breakaway. You see the breakaway are working exceptionally well, and having 2 riders in there from Liquigas Cannondale will give a big advantage to Peter Sagan. That gap now is stretched. It's 20 seconds the advantage. The gap is actually now starting to open quite a fraction. There's Sagan, turned professional in 2009. Had 5 wins last year. As I said, 2 of those were stages of Paris-Nice. He also won the points competition in Paris-Nice last year, and he won 2 stages and the points in the Amgen Tour of California. Started off his season very well. In fact, he won 3 stages of the Tour of Sardinia in February, and of course won the overall classification. There's Bernie Eisel. That would indicate that Mark Cavendish is in good shape, because Bernie Eisel, he's the workhorse for HTC High Road. And interestingly enough, despite the success of HTC High Road, they are reputedly in the search for a new sponsor for next season. If they don't pull one in, there's Thomas Voeckler. He's amazing. He really is amazing. Let's have a look. Over on the left-hand side, the Kop van der Weegstrijd, the front end of the bike race. On the right-hand side, the main peloton. And they've opened up that gap now. It's 25 seconds there, the 4 leaders over the main field. Now this is starting to look a little bit precarious, and that's probably why Bernie Eisel has come to the front. Look at the way Eisel accelerated around that corner. He started to open up the gaps on all of these other riders, because he wants to pull that 4-man breakaway back before we get to the main road. Leaving the Heuvelland and the Kemmelberg and all of the climbs behind us now, it's pretty much flat on the running down towards the finish. And these long, winding roads now, before we get to the main road, will start to turn towards the advantage of the peloton once we head down towards Ghent for Ghent-Wevelgem finish. Sagan and Bodnar are the 2 riders in here for Liquigas Cannondale. It's Quick Step rider Sylvain Chavanel who's done most of the work so far. He's just slipping to the back. He's the man who actually started this breakaway. Chavanel turned professional way back in 2000, won 4 races last year, and 2 of those were stages in the Tour de France, and he had a very nasty crash in Liège-Bastogne-Liège, and in fact he fractured his skull and was in a coma for 3 or 4 days. It was an induced coma, and he didn't come back to competition until the Tour de France, and it was amazing the form that he had. Now, looking at these riders in the group, there's a lot of riders in here for Team Sky. They're not going to do any of the pacemaking. That's Jeremy Hunt just over on the left-hand side. Over to the right, I can see Marcus Burkhardt is the rider from BMC. He's looking after his teammate just behind him, and that, of course, is Alessandro Ballan. Lots of nerves now. Gregory Rast is the rider here on the front in the red and white jersey of Team Rabobank. Team Radio Shack, sorry. And Radio Shack, they've actually had a pretty good season so far, Radio Shack, as Voeckler still has the guts and the energy to come to the front. And now he's thinking about his own teammates. He's been in the breakaway. He's got an awful lot of publicity for himself and for his team. Just looking back down the road there, we're still looking at 25 seconds advantage. And we're looking at around about, well, it's 25 seconds advantage. And I would say we're looking at around about 25 kilometers to go. They cannot ease up in a situation like this. They've got to keep the pressure. Look at Voeckler. He never gives up at all, does this man. This is Lars Bak on the front, the big strong rider from HTC. Obviously Mark Cavendish is in there. I haven't seen him, but I must admit that the way HTC High Road are riding currently, that would indicate that Cavendish is in this group. Got himself over the climbs, got himself over the it's one of the old First World War graveyards over on the left-hand side. Remembering the 1914 war, the Great War, the war to end all wars. Well, it all happened very much in this area where we are. One of the most somber moments I think I've ever experienced was a number of years ago on the 11th of November. At the 11th hour, on the 11th day of the 11th month, I went down to Ypres to celebrate the Armistice Day, the ending of the First World War, and what a dramatic day that was as they trumpeted out the last post on the bugle. And it was a misty, cold day, and almost let you imagine how difficult it must have been to battle out the First World War in the trenches in this part of Belgium during those horrible winter months. Well, these riders are coming out of the trenches now. Look at that. There's a good organisation there. You can see that line of blue and white jerseys. Well, that is Team Quick-Step. They're looking after Tom Bonen. He's the rider just at the back of the line. But if the sprinters want to have their day, it must be a difficult situation for Quick-Step to be in, because they've got their man Sylvain Chavanel in this breakaway group, and he's always very, very keen to come to the front. Bodnar and Sagan are the other two riders in here. Ian Stannard is a very good track rider. What an incredible squad Team Sky have put together over the last couple of seasons. I must admit, I never thought when I turned professional back in 1978 that I would be commentating many years later on a truly British professional cycling team. And to add to that, next season there will be a very, very good Australian professional cycling team who will be vying for a position in the Tour de France as well. That gap now has gone up to 30 seconds. These are the narrow roads. Shortly they will line up onto the long, straight charge into the finishing line in Wevelgem. This is Bodnar on the front, followed by his teammate Sagan. Hard to believe that Sagan is just 22 years of age. He's an incredible sprinter. Stannard in third position. Sagan's brother is in fact turned professional this year. He's just turned 22 years of age. He was the national road race champion of Slovakia last year. As a junior, he was a very, very good rider on the track. World Junior Pursuit champion. Now we've started to see Omega Pharma Lotto come to the front. That must mean that Andre Greipel is in this group also, followed by Vogler, followed by Lars Bak. These little cenotaphs all over this part of Flanders. This is a very religious part of Belgium. You can feel everywhere that you go the strong Catholic influence in this part of Belgium. As we see this organisation, everybody now realises that's a serious breakaway off the front. Vogler, he pulls off. He will probably be thinking about their team sprinter, and that of course is Sébastien Chavanel. It's rather strange really to think that Sébastien Chavanel has got his team chasing his brother Sylvain Chavanel, who's in the breakaway group. And the gap is not so huge now that it's actually starting to come down. I put that at 20 seconds, so the main field are starting to claw their way back to the leading group of four. This move by Chavanel will take a little bit of pressure off the shoulders of Team Quick-Step though, because while he is in the breakaway, Tom Bonen and the rest of Quick-Step, they can sit in the main pack and watch who is doing the pacemaking and take an easy ride. It's on this part of the road that a number of years ago, in fact, if you remember, if you've been watching World Cycling Productions for years, you will remember it was on this part of the road that Eric Zabel was in the main field, and a horse jumped out of a garden to the right-hand side, right into the main field, and took Eric Zabel out of the event. The organisers now trying to keep this race organised and trying to keep it safe for the riders. They're getting the motorbikes out of the gap, making sure that it's a clean race. You can see the speed now in the peloton as they can start to sense this is the moment when the race is about to change. This is the moment now when the sprinters feel they've got their chance. There you can see Greipel, not too far from the front. Bernie Eisel, he's the man from HTC High Road doing the big pacemaking in the pack. The teams of the sprinters now are starting to get this bike race organised. The speed now is up to around about 45 kilometers an hour as Bernie Eisel doesn't even think about the fact that he's a former winner of this bike race. He's thinking today one thing in the back of his mind, it's Cav. Cavendish can get the victory here this afternoon. Omega Farmalotto, they're thinking about Greipel. He rode very well over the climbs. He was never too far away from the front end of the pack, Greipel. As this group is down, it's down to about 50 riders left in Ghent Wevelgem here this afternoon as they wind their way around these very tricky roads. We're looking now, I would say, at around about 22 kilometers to go to the finish. Stannard on the front for Sky. He's taking the pressure off his own teammate Juan Antonio Fletcher, who'll be looking well. In fact, that gap, although it came back down to 20 seconds, it's starting to stretch out again, which is a surprise because there's a lot of pressure coming onto the front end of the peloton from the teams of the sprinters. Chavanel, he's a French rider. He's a very good bike rider, Chavanel. He has learned his trade riding for Team Quickstep over the years on these one-day classics. He really has matured as a professional bike rider. He felt that he was stagnating when he was riding for a French team, and he decided he actually moved across, and this is quite rare in any sport. He moved across to the Belgian team for a lower salary because he felt it was more important for him to learn how to ride these races than it was to earn a lot of money and be comfortable in a French team. So there's Andre Greipel. He's about 4th or 5th position, just a little bit. In fact, he's got Philippe Gilbert looking after him. Philippe Gilbert is in about 7th or 8th position in this line of riders. Behind him, Andre Greipel. He's keeping the sprinter from Germany right at the front end of the main field. Greipel has been a great sprinter over the last couple of seasons. Strangely enough, he was on the same team as Mark Cavendish, but they never rode the same races. Greipel also had a pretty good start to the season with a stage victory in the Tour of the Algarve. He won 21 races last year, but this year, having moved across to Omega Farmalotto, he's the #1 sprinter on the squad. Bernie Eisel doing a great job of work. We're not too far away now from the town of Menen. And once we get through Menen, then we'll start to swing onto the main road, and then we'll line up for a very fast dash towards the finishing line in Wevelgem. This is life at the back. This is certainly not the position that you want to be sitting in as riders are trying. You see that little touch on the shoulder there? This is how teams cooperate in a race like this. A rider from Vacances Soleil there, he saw his teammate was sitting a little bit too far back. He just touched him on the shoulder and said, "Come on, I'll do the effort, I'll make the pace, and I'll move you to the front end of the peloton before we start to get towards the finish." I just noticed there, not to two riders behind the Thor Hushovd. You can see the world champion there. Well, 2 riders behind there. Number 3, there is Mark Cavendish, sitting comfortably in the peloton. He's thinking about the victory this afternoon. He won't move to the front end of the main field till we start to feel a little bit of a crosswind coming across as we get onto the big wide road that leads us up to Wevelgem. This is the business end of the pack. This is where all of the work has been doing. These are the men who are sacrificing themselves for their teammates. They're not thinking about themselves. They're thinking about what is the position of that 4-man breakaway. The gap is still hovering at around about 25 seconds for the quartet. Leading riders, Chavanel and Sagan are the 2 most dangerous riders in that group. Ian Stannard. Oh, there's a crash at the back there. I think you might have just noticed there was a ride. There's Cavendish. Cavendish is not happy at all with that. I don't know what happened at all there. All of a sudden, we came around that corner. Everybody was lined up, and somebody took out Mark Cavendish. A rider there in the ditch. He went down. That was the first. There's a couple of riders gone down from Team Sky. They went down very dramatically. Just having a look, that's Jeremy Hunter's gone down there on the left-hand side. Cavendish went down in that crash as well. Well, that was a ridiculous crash, I have to say, and there's not going to be too many nice words said by Mark Cavendish there, because Cavendish is just getting himself going. The team car came up alongside him very quickly to push him back into this bike race. Well, this is not the right. We're inside of 20 kilometers to go now, and Cavendish went down very hard. It wasn't his fault. The rider in front of him went down. Let's just have a look at this. It's just over there on the right-hand side. Cavendish, in fact, was a long way down the main field. The guy behind actually locked onto Cavendish's bike. He's shouting for a new bike. He's calling for the team mechanic. You can just see him clicking onto his jersey there. Well, inside his jersey, he's got a push-to-talk button to his radio. He's talking to the mechanics behind. Now he's going to have a long, hard chase to get himself back into the race. that has done nothing to affect now the advantage of this four-man leading breakaway. You can see the peloton in the background, so any of those riders involved in that crash are going to have a very, very difficult time to pull themselves back into the race today. So Bodnar, Sagan, Stannard and Sylvain Chavanel, they're still locked in at 20 to 25 seconds, their advantage over the main field. Nobody shirking their responsibility to do the pacemaking in this group. Well, that crash has actually splintered the field a fraction as we look here at Nick Noyens. He's a rider from Saxo Bank doing the pacemaker. I can see this is the chase at the back. Now, have they sent back a rider for Mark Cavendish? He's about 15 to 20 seconds off the back end of the main field. The neutral service car there going very quickly by him. So Cavendish, he was a few moments ago thinking about victory in Ghent Wevelgem here this afternoon. Now he's thinking about, how do I get myself back into this race? Just coming up to another rider who's involved in an accident, and he won't get any help at all from this guy as Cavendish comes up to the wheel of the rider from Top Sport Vlaanderen. But you can see the neutral service car has scuttled away now. There's a rider from Team Sky a little bit further up. He too was involved in that crash. And at speeds like this, inside of the last 20 kilometres, I'm not sure that Cavendish is going to get himself back into Ghent Wevelgem here this year, at least. There's the split. Now Cavendish is behind that group. The front end of the main field is just in there. You can see them all across the road. There's a lot of pressure being put on. This is the second part of the peloton. They were caught out because of that crash halfway down the main field. And you can be sure that HTC High Road will be not doing any of the pacemaking now because they know they've lost their big chance. And that, of course, is Mark Cavendish. Bernie Eisel. I wonder if he knows that Mark Cavendish has gone down. He must do, because most of the riders in this race are wearing race radios. Greipel was not involved in that fracas at all. Now, this is Thor Hushovd. Now, where is he? Just looking around the corner. Hushovd in the World Champions jersey. A little bit further around, they're about. So this is the small town of Menen. Now, once they start to get into Menen, then they will start to line themselves up very shortly onto that big wide boulevard that takes them into Wevelgem. Well, Hushovd too is off the back of the race. There is the front end of the peloton. This gap has been created by that little crash. Now let's get a chance here to look at the race situation. There are the four leaders just going out of sight. There is the front end of the main field. Hushovd and Cavendish have been caught out by that nasty little accident. It's going to be a big scramble now, as Sylvain Chavanel sees this as the turning point in the race. If the race is split up and big riders like Cavendish and Hushovd are behind, maybe the teams of the sprinters will not turn the screws down quite as hard. Bodnar and Sagan, the two riders from Liquigas Cannondale, they see this as a great opportunity. If the race goes down to the finish like this could very easily be a win for Peter Sagan. He won 3 stages of the Tour of Sardinia in February and took the overall classification. He was unbeatable in that race. And I think he's because of his age, at just 21 and a half years of age, Peter Sagan is trying to set himself up to have a very good early part of the season. He won't participate in the Tour de France this year. He's going to make his first incursion into the Grand Tours in the Vuelta a España towards the end of the season. That gap is still 25 seconds. It's not going up and it's not going down. It's locked in, as you can see, the front end of the main field, and it's still Saxo Bank doing the pacemaking. They're obviously thinking about their sprinters, Haedo, JJ Haedo. And because of the fact there are no cars, you can realise that this race is certainly now starting to take form. That's the second part of the peloton. Mark Cavendish is still around about 20 seconds off the back end of the second part of the main field. That's Greipel. He's the third place rider there for Omega Pharma Lotto. He'll be thinking it's a payday here this afternoon, because if this race all comes back together, he knows he's got rid of his arch rival Mark Cavendish, and so for him it's a very good crack at getting himself a victory in the race for the sprinters Ghent Wevelgem. Eisel, he's looking around saying, what do I do now? He's wondering what the situation is with Cavendish, and if Cavendish is not in good form, that could give the advantage over to Bernie Eisel, who in the past has been a winner of this bike race. That's Tom Bonin, his third place rider of those riders in the quick step jerseys, the blue and white jerseys. He's just sitting pretty here this afternoon because they got a strong rider in the group. That's the second group now. This is the second part of the main field. Thor Hushoff, the champion du monde, the world champion, in the white jersey there with the rainbow stripes around it. Winner of the green jersey competition in the Tour de France last year. He realizes he's got to battle back in. The crowd are going crazy. It's great to see. There's another rider there with an incident at the back. That's a rider from Rabobank. He's just had a flat tire. In fact, it looks as if the second part of the main field are now starting to claw their way back to the peloton. Movistar, new Spanish team. Movistar is a cell phone company out of Spain, and they've come over to take over what was formerly originally it was the Reynolds team with Pedro Delgado, which then became the Benesto squad, which then became Il Baleares, which then became Case d'Epargne. They've been the same structure for around about 20 years in Spanish cycling. Hushoff is clawing his way back into this race. It's now down to around about 10 seconds. They're all waiting till they get onto that big wide main road, which takes them from Ypres to the eastern side, the western side of Belgium, to Wevelgem, right in the very heart of Flanders. Now there's another move here. Again, this is an aggressive move, and this once again looks like Philippe Gilbert. Gilbert has said, right now, I'm going to take this race by the horns because I have to win this race on my own if I'm going to get clear. He's very quickly pulled back into the fold there by Geert Steegmans. Steegmans looks over his shoulder. He's looking for Tom Bonin here this afternoon. And this is the main road now. This is the far section of the course. Scuttling across the gap there in the black jersey is Juan Antonio Fletcher. I have to say, I thought that group was all going back together, but once again you can see the foreshortening here of the camera shows that group with Thor Hushoff has not yet made the contact. So Bodnar and Sagan. Just have a look at this. That's a little move. This is the acceleration. A little touch on the shoulders there. He's a great rider. I really have to respect Philippe Gilbert. And although he comes from the French-speaking part of Belgium, he actually speaks very good Flemish, which endears him to the Belgian public. He also speaks extremely good English. And when you ask him if he's a French-speaking Belgian or a Walloon, he says, no, I'm not a Walloon, I'm not Flemish, I'm a Belgian. And he's very proud of representing the joint Belgian families. So, again, you can see this is the second group. They're still halfway across the gap. All of the cars are lined up behind them. These two riders are trying to get themselves across the gap. And I still have got no information on the position of Mark Cavendish, but I still do believe that he's slightly off the back end of this group by around about 20 to 30 seconds. He's got no teammates alongside him, so he's going to have a very hard time. This is a fast run-in now towards the finishing line. Hillefeld, looking now about 15 kilometers to go to the finish. That is the front end of the chase group, and the gap is actually, because of the pressure here being put on this group by Philippe Gilbert, that second group with Thor Hushoff is actually not making any inroads currently. The gap now between the four leaders and the main field is 22 seconds. And the gap between the main field and the second part of the main field is 24 seconds. So it's still pretty much the whole of this race is separated by about 45 seconds. Alessandro Ballan is the second rider in there. They may well be thinking about their Belgian sprinter BMC Racing, because Greg van Avermaet is a top man when it comes down to the sprint, and it may well be that they will try and look after him when they come down towards the finishing line. Well, these guys now are starting to open up the gap. It's been locked in at 25 seconds for a long, long time, and it's just in fact tipped up to a 35-second advantage. And all of a sudden, Team BMC Racing have realized that they have got to get themselves right into the race if they're going to try and get themselves a victory. Gilbert, Omega Pharma Lotto. He's burying himself this afternoon. He's thinking about one thing. He's thinking about Andre Greipel. There is Greipel, the big man there. His nickname is the Gorilla. We saw him race exceptionally well in the start of the season. In fact, last year He won 3 stages of the Santos Tour Down Under and won himself the overall classification. They said he wouldn't get himself over Old Wollonga Hill. Well, he did, and he got the victory too. So still, this situation looking very precarious for these 4 leaders, Bodnar and Sagan. Sagan starting to dream about that little bit of a victory if he can make this breakaway succeed. Stannard, well, he must be wondering what he's doing in a situation like this. Stannard, an extremely good track rider, and he'll be thinking about the possibility of a victory a little bit later on. He turned professional a number of years ago. In fact, he got his first chance of a professional ride when he turned professional for the Van Vliet team of Belgium before being picked up by Team Lampre. After that, he rode for Team Landebau Credit. And last year, he was picked up by Team Sky. No victories to his credit, although he did get a victory a few years ago in a small circuit race. But his background is really on the track as we look at the main. This is a big gap now. I have a feeling, I honestly believed that that group containing Thor Hushovd and the other riders in this race were going to get themselves back into contention. But because of the pressure that's being applied at the front end of the main field by Team BMC Racing, they are now having a very difficult time pulling themselves back into the event. Look at a face here of Sylvain Chavanel. He's a good little flick of the wrist there, asking Stannard to come forward and do the pacemaking. It's still 25 seconds, the difference between these 4 riders. You know, we're not, but very shortly we will be looking at the 12 or 13 kilometre to go banner, and these riders can start to believe that they're going to get themselves a victory here this afternoon, because it's always funny on the running towards a finish, especially a race like this, Ghent Wevelgem. It's a hard race to finish off. The referee is pulling himself out. He wants the gap to be nice and clean. Marcus Burkhardt was the man just pulling off with the white sunglasses there, a former winner himself, but he today thinking about Greg van Avermaet probably, or maybe a last attack by Alessandro Ballan, the former world champion. Thomas Voeckler, amazing. He's been in the breakaway since the early part of this race. He led the race by 5 minutes. He was caught when we went over the Mont Kemmel for the final time, and he's still prepared to come to the front and do the pacemaking. Leonardo Duque is the small rider from Cofidis there with the white sunglasses as well. He's a pretty good sprinter for Team Cofidis. They will be probably counting on him a little bit later on. Lots of pressure now on the front end of this peloton as they start to get into the very difficult part of this race. They're now starting to realize this is when they've got to put the hammer down. This is when they've got to pull it all back together in Ghent Wevelgem here this afternoon. That gap now, it's not very much more than 15 seconds. There they are, the quartet that leads Ghent Wevelgem. They've led it since we came away from the Kemmelberg on the final time. It was this move was really very much started by the 2 riders from Liquigas, Bodnar and Peter Sagan. They were joined very rapidly by Ian Stannard of the United Kingdom. As we look a little bit further back, and that's not a very big group at all, is it? A small group of riders around. Lots of work being done by BMC Racing. Tom Bonan is in this group, but left behind currently Mark Cavendish, no longer in with a chance because they brought in the team car. So that would indicate to me that if the team cars have been brought into that gap, then the group of Thor Hushovd and Mark Cavendish a little bit further back must be at around about 30 to 45 seconds in arrears. And great shots these as we look. We're now pretty much in the outskirts of Wevelgem. The French border is not very much more than 2 kilometres away from here. The final 30 kilometres of Ghent Wevelgem goes right along the French-Belgian border all of the time. Digging deep. You can see that's Lars Bak in second position. The rider from HTC, no longer is he doing the pacemaking this afternoon for Mark Cavendish. They've probably decided that they'd let Bernie Eisel have a little crack at the victory here this afternoon. The breakaway now is down to just 12 seconds. There they are. They make the right-hand turn. If you were to go straight on, you would be at the finish line in around about 15 minutes. Now we go. That's 35 riders in this group. There's a lot of riders in this group from Team Quickstep. Around that corner, Lars back doing the pacemaking. At the back end of the group, Cofidis will be thinking about the possibility of a victory for their man Leonardo Duque. Thomas Voeckler. I can only think that Thomas Voeckler must be thinking about his teammate who is in this group, and that of course is the young French sprinter, and that is going to be Sébastien Chavanel. Voeckler burying himself. He can't have very much left in the think tank here this afternoon, Voeckler, as he starts to get himself a little bit more and more tired after the long breakaway that he's been here in this afternoon. The 4 riders at the front are now looking at a 10-second advantage. 10 seconds. That's all when we're looking now at possibly 10 kilometers to go to the finish. These are the urgent moments. These are the moments when you think, can we do it? Will we pull it all back together? As we pull back here from the helicopter shot, it's down to about 7 seconds the advantage. You can't give up at a moment like this. You've just got to keep riding. Stannard is the rider on the front in that black jersey for Team Sky. Team Sky are turning out to be a very good professional bike racing team. It was the dream of the British Cycling Federation to put together. Of course, the British cycling has been phenomenal on the track over the last couple of seasons at the Olympic Games, the World Championships and the Commonwealth Games, but the big dream of the Cycling Federation was to put together a team that could rival anybody on the international circuit in road racing, and now they're starting to do that with so many of the British track riders coming through from that track program and turning themselves across to be some of the top bike riders in the world of road racing. Gilbert, 3rd or 4th position. Andre Greipel is up to 5th or 6th position. He's starting to get that little bit twitchy as Greipel. He realizes this is a very good chance for him. He's a tough bike rider. 21 victories to his credit last year and 25 victories the year before. He is a phenomenal rider, but he was always riding in the shadow of Mark Cavendish. Well, Mark Cavendish is not in this group this afternoon. A silly little crash at about 30 kilometers to go. Again, another corner. Circumnavigating now Wevelgem, getting closer towards that finishing line. The gap is about 45 seconds from the first half of the main field back to the main peloton, which contains Thor Hushovd and Mark Cavendish, who got caught out by that crash. They're really lining it out now as this is actually the town of Menen. If you take a right-hand turn here, in 500 meters you'll be across the French border, and you go over the small river which separates Belgium from France. A wonderful belfry. Nearly all of the major towns in Belgium and the Flanders have a belfry right in the town square. It's a very typical. Look at the crowd here. They know this race. This is one of the classic races. It's a wonderful Sunday afternoon here in Belgium now as Sylvain Chavanel sits on the back of this group. Stannard. If this came down to the finish, Stannard would have a very good chance of getting himself a victory, because his background coming from the track proves that he's an extremely good finisher. But nobody, I think, in that leading group of 4 would have the power to outwit Peter Sagan. Omega Pharma Lotto have taken the responsibility. They are dishing out the pain here this afternoon now, thinking about their man who's going. There's Tyler Farrar there in the black and white jersey of Garmin Cervelo, the American. He's hoping to be the 2nd American ever to win Ghent Wevelgem after George Hincapie won this race a couple of years ago, and he's well placed at the front end of the pack. Daniele Bernati is the rider in the black and white jersey of Team Leopard Trek, just right behind him. Chavanel puts down the hammer now. There you can see they're starting to open up the gaps. Stannard scuttles across the gap there to pull himself back to Peter Sagan and Sylvain Chavanel. Chavanel knows that these are very important moments. Look at that beautiful windmill over on the left-hand side. That's the motorway which would take you right up to the Belgian Riviera, I suppose we could call it. The towns of De Panne, Koksijde and Ostend. I've seen races like this, Ghent Wevelgem in the past, survive. The Kop van der Wegstrijd, 3 riders still surviving. Sagan, Chavanel, Stannard. On the right-hand side, it's Philippe Gilbert doing all of the pacemaking now for Omega Pharma Lotto. He wants this race for Andre Greipel. It's 4 seconds now is the advantage. There they are. They are now just surviving as we tick off another banner. 2 kilometers to go to the finish, and they've still got that 5-second advantage. Chavanel realizes, he knows he's got to keep going at a moment like this. Stannard is thinking, shall I make a final move? BMC, they are looking after Greg van Avermaet. He can finish off races like, oh, there's another little move going from Stannard. Stannard, the British rider from Team Sky, has seen this as a big opportunity. He's a great track rider. He is probably one of the rare riders in the professional field these days who could steal a win like this in the final few kilometres. Sagan realises he's got to nail him back. The rider from Slovakia in the lime green jersey of Liquigas Canada, he knows if he can pull himself back to Stannard, he too has got the chance of a victory. But it's red and black on the front end of the main field. It's BMC Racing. They will be looking after their sprinter Greg Van Avermaet as Ian Stannard feels this could be a win for Great Britain here this afternoon. Stannard has got himself the gap. Go back to 1974, and that's when Barry Hoban was the winner of this race, ahead of a certain Eddie Merckx on that occasion. But the two chasers are only 2 or 3 seconds themselves ahead of the main field. Inside the Flamme Rouge now, we've got 1,000 metres to go down to the finish. Look at the main field. They are all over this road now. They realise they've got to get it organised. They've got to keep the pace nice and high. It's still BMC Racing on the front end of the main field. They're almost onto the wheel there of Sylvain Chavanel, and Stannard now, his body is shouting out for a little bit of respite. Please put up the white flag. Don't hurt me anymore like this. But Stannard has still got that advantage. He's still got himself about a 10 or 15 metre lead over the front end of the main field around the corner. Very shortly we'll start to see the banner over the finishing line. They are so dreadfully close to him, and it's still BMC Racing on the front end of the main field. Now on the left hand side it looks as if it's Quick-Step starting to lead out the group, and that is going to be for Tom Boonen here this afternoon. Right on his wheel you can see that looks to me as if Bernie Eisel's there. They're all over the main field, and Stannard is still surviving. He's still got himself 2 or 3 metres, but look at the big acceleration starting to come. That's Stigament over on the right-hand side. That's going to be Tom Boonen coming through very fast indeed. Bernie Eisel in the white jersey. Tyler Farah, the American, is coming up to challenge the Belgian, but Tom Boonen is right through here in the middle. It's going to be Boonen on the line. Greipel is there as well. It's Boonen. Tom Boonen gets himself the victory as he comes across the line. I think it was Daniele Bernardi got himself across the line. Oh, there's a crash. Just after the finish line, there's a crash. A couple of riders have gone down, but there's no mistaking there about the winner. Dominic Boonen gets himself the victory here this afternoon in Ghent Wevelgem with a well-timed sprint. He was challenged there by Daniele Bernardi. A couple of riders went down there very rapidly onto the ground. Tyler Farah will get himself 3rd place, and in 4th place it was Andre Greipel. But going down very nastily indeed, the rider from FDJ, I think that was Johan Offredo of France, who went down in a very dramatic style with Leonardo Duque. So congratulations all around for Tom Boonen. The team, they were in an ideal situation. They had Sylvain Chavanel off the front end of the peloton, and so they could wait and sit back and have an easy ride. And then they set it up to absolute perfection down towards the finishing line then, with Tom Boonen getting himself a well-earned victory. So let's have a look at that one more time. A perfect lead out here. That's still Stannard surviving inside of the last 200 metres, but the lead out there by Quick-Step for Tom Boonen. Boonen goes right up through the inside. Tyler Farah in the black jersey there, trying to get himself onto the slipstream. That's Daniele Bernardi on the left-hand side, coming up forward and coming very, very fast indeed. But the power of Tom Boonen, nobody was going to challenge him at all. Andre Greipel comes up on the right-hand side for a good 4th place finish, but there was no challenge at all there for Tom Boonen, and that was Offredo there. That was the rider from FDJ who went down, with Leonardo Duque, the Colombian rider on Team Cofidis, right on top of him. But for Boonen, a great job finished off. So losing a little bit of time, this is a group of Mark Cavendish and the world champion Thor Hushovd coming in, and they lost themselves a minute and a half on the day. So no victory today for Mark Cavendish of HTC High Road. So as we look down on Ghent Wevelgem, the finale, there's confirmation that Tom Boonen did get himself the victory here ahead of Daniele Bernardi and Tyler Farah. Andre Greipel, despite all of the work that was done by his teammates, got himself in 4th place. Bernie Eisel was in 7th, and Baden Cook from Australia rounding out the top 10. So after a brilliant Ghent Wevelgem here this afternoon, a magical finish by Tom Boonen, I'm Paul Sherwin saying on behalf of World Cycling Productions, we'll see you later on in the season for races like Paris-Roubaix and a Ronde van Vlaanderen. Goodbye.